Good evening, everyone. I've noticed I'm supposed to talk about how technology is changing our future, and I feel that I'm singularly unequipped to answer that question. I thought instead I'll talk about how to think about managing your career in a time of uncertainty and great change. So it depends on your interest. If you're interested more in technology, there's a good time to take a tea break. If you're interested in your career, you might want to stay on. Presumably, there's more interest in your own career. You can hear me without a mic or anything, right? So I don't plan to use a PowerPoint unlike the previous gentleman. I worked at Microsoft long enough that I hate it. So I just thought I have a small sheet of notes in case I forget something, and that's all I'll use. Now, talking about managing your career is a difficult subject because for two reasons. One is success. The definition of success is a hugely subjective issue. You know, look at somebody from a distance, you think they're successful. And the truth is, they're feeling like a miserable failure because they're comparing themselves to someone else. So what is success itself is unclear. And of course, there are many, many, many ways to get there. So one thing I've learned at the ripe age of 53 is, there is no formula, there is no recipe. So today what I thought I'll do is reflect on a few things, about my own life and career, and which I think are elements or principles that are relevant, and hopefully you'll find it useful. I told Shankar that I'll talk for about 20 minutes and then open it up for some discussion or Q&A, and hopefully there will be a few questions. Now, first of all, I want to say that the idea of a career has changed profoundly, certainly since the time that I studied at IITBAA. You know, my parents' generation thought of a career as getting a secure government job and retiring 40 years later. My generation thought about, getting out of India, getting a private sector job and retiring 40 years later. But by the time I graduated from Harvard Business School in 1992, when we were leaving, a professor, came and counseled us on how to think about careers, and he said, forget about lifetime employment. This was a time when companies like IBM still used to guarantee lifetime employment. They said, forget about it. On average, you guys will have 2.5 jobs in your career, which means about 15 years if you think about it. Well, that turned out to be completely a bad forecast. I think we're now down to about 5 years on average. If you think about even the tenure of a CEO, the median span of a CEO anywhere in the world is down to about 5.5 years. So things are really compressing. And the very idea of jobs is evaporating before our eyes, thanks to both demographics as well as technology. It's unclear how many people are going to have jobs in the traditional sense that we know it going forward, right? Because we used to think about technology just automating blue-collar work, manual work, robots and machinery and all that. And I don't know if you've seen a video, but if you haven't, I'd recommend it. It's on YouTube. It's called Humans Need Not Apply. And it's a fantastic video because it shows all the different professional jobs, the white-collar jobs, the knowledge work that is likely to be automated with the level of computer science that we have today. Forget advances. And it's pretty scary. So we're headed towards what people are calling the gig economy, where more and more of us better learn to be entrepreneurs or freelancers or self-employed. In a funny way, I saw that coming a while ago, a long time ago. So even, in 2003, as I moved to Microsoft, I said, I'm going to think of it more as a project, a gig for a few years. I never saw it as a career, a place I would retire from or any such thing. And you have to really think about your own career in much the same way, rather than a predictable path that that is, quite clear a priori. People who tend to look at it in that deterministic way often tend to get disappointed, because life is not like that. Now, what is it, from the brief introduction, you would have realized that I've had a bit of an unusual career for anyone. I started out as a mechanical engineer and spent 15 years building diesel engines, generator sets, and trucks. Then suddenly I switched to software, joined Microsoft, helped build that company's presence in India. Then I became an author and venture capitalist, and then in the last year, something strange happened. The government asked me to head a public sector bank, and it's really very strange because I know nothing about banking and even less about public sector. So I've done very, very different things. What is it that I would say that I've learned from that? First thing I'd say is it's really important to experiment with a lot of things and take some big risks once in a while. And quite early in life, I hung around old people and I saw that many of them have a lot of regret. Turn 70, you look back and you have regrets. And the regrets were not about decisions they took that didn't work out. Almost always I saw that the regret was about the decision not taken and wondering if I had taken that path, where it might have led and so forth. And I said, I don't want to be like that. I'd rather, make mistakes of commission rather than mistakes of omission. And so right from the beginning, every 10 years, I've done something quite different. So when I graduated from IITBAA, I had a safe option. I had admission to IMA. In those days, that was a pretty standard route. You do that and then you join Unilever and learn to sell soap and shampoo, and that's a good career. But I decided I'm going to go abroad. It wasn't that unusual, right? Half my class went abroad. But it still, as an individual, it felt pretty scary. Those days, foreign exchange was scarce. I was late in applying for it, and so I had $20 in my pocket. I did have an assistantship, but leaving India with $20 in your pocket was a bit worrying. Anyway, there's a longer story. I won't waste my time telling that. But it worked out. The bigger risk was in 1996 deciding to come back to India. This is before the India story was, bright, and it was early days, and almost everybody said this is a disaster. You've lost your mind. And that included my family. It included my boss, who was the CEO of the company. He said, you're making a dreadful mistake. But it was an adventure, and I really wanted to do it. Did the same thing in 2003, 2004. When I turned 40. There's something, how many of you are over 40? Less than half. So there's something magical that'll happen to the rest of you as you turn 40. There's you begin to, the sense of mortality starts setting in. You start realizing, hey, maybe there are not that many years ahead, I better make them count. This is my last chance to do something big. I have 10 good years ahead of me and I better do something important. Well, I felt the same way. And so when Microsoft said we need somebody to build a business in India, I said, okay. Now again, everybody said don't do it. First of all, you don't know anything about IT. And it's a difficult company with a tough culture. And so this is going to end badly. And that included good mentors like Nandan Nilekani and others. But I said, maybe they're right. But when I turn 50, which will I regret more? Having had a chance to build Microsoft in India and fail, or having had that chance and passing on it? So I said, let me give it a shot. Fortunately, it worked out. And then I turned 47. This is in 2000 and I forget, 10 or 11. And I said, there's no guarantee in life that it's going to play out the way I want, which is you turn 60, you retire, you're still energetic and healthy, and then you do the things you want. So I said, I'm going to leave now, and I'm going to do the things I want. And I had no plan, and I said, I'm going to try lots of things. Many of them didn't work out, but eventually I settled on a set of things that I do today, which are really satisfying. So what is my point here? That every 10 years, I've blown up my life, and I'm happier for it. Okay, so take some risk and experiment. I would say another important thing is this idea of learning agility. This is a term that psychologists use and HR people use in hiring. They look for people with what is called learnability or learning agility. And if you think about it, it's pretty commonsensical, right? If the world is changing fast, and there's a lot of uncertainty, You want people who have the ability to learn new things and adapt. You don't want people who are really good at one thing and then they're rigid. So the way I describe learning agility is, if you don't know how to swim and somebody throws you in the sea without a life jacket, how do you react? Do you just drown quietly? Or do you splash and shout a lot and try and get attention so somebody will come and rescue you? Or do you calm down and you learn to dog paddle and then you find a piece of floating wood and then eventually come ashore? So what you want is to be the kind of person, if you're confronted with a situation that you've never dealt with before, you're way outside your comfort zone, the ability to figure things out and deal with it, because that's what's going to happen more and more often to all of us. Now, fortunately, this learning agility is a muscle, right? You can, like a gym, you can go in there and pump some weights and the muscle becomes stronger and stronger. And so the way you do it is repeatedly put yourself outside your comfort zone. Okay, first in small ways, then as your confidence grows in bigger ways. And it's just, it's like training. And along with that, you develop the ability to learn new things. Again, as I said in my life, I've done very, very different things, from good old-fashioned mechanical engineering and production to understanding how software is written and sold, to venture investing, and now, of all things, a bank. And so it forces you to learn new things. So I think this is a crucial thing that each of us has to get better at. A third thing I'd say is we need to learn to manage our reputation pretty intentionally. Whether you realize it or not, each of you is a brand. Now, some of us are mega brands. Think about Nandan Nilekani or Raghuram Rajan talking to IITs. Important, I know both of them well. And the interesting thing is, they're not just highly accomplished individuals. They've also been incredibly thoughtful about how they have built and managed their reputations. It's both, okay? And so if you think about yourself, you also have to do that. In the new gig economy, the currency is actually your reputation to a very large extent. Now, I learned this in an interesting way. I never thought about managing my reputation, but when I applied to Harvard Business School for the first time, I was rejected, and I was, quite unhappy about it. But I called the admissions officer and said, "Why did you reject me?" He said, "Well, your grades are good, and your GMAT is good, but so is everybody else's. There's nothing interesting about you. There's nothing different about you." So he says, "Go, differentiate yourself, and then apply again." So I spent the next two years trying to figure out what to do that would allow me to stand out. And one of the things I did was I thought a lot about the work I was doing at Cummins at that time. And I wrote an article and published it in what's called the Harvard Business Review. And this came out in 1990. I was 26 years old. I became the youngest author ever to publish in HBR. And not only that, it got me into the habit of writing. And so since then, I've been writing and publishing, and I continue to write about lots of things. And that built a reputation, okay? So you have to think intentionally about, no matter how technical you are, you have to think about, how do I build a professional reputation? How do I, be seen as a thought leader? You also have to think about what is your reputation as a person. You've got to work hard at making sure that people don't see you as a selfish jerk, and so on. As somebody who's dependable, who does excellent work. So this is something that you can't just leave to chance, but you have to manage quite intentionally. The almost penultimate thing I would say is, when you think about both success in life and in career, the thing that matters the most is what I call learning to manage yourself. At the end of the day, each of us, I believe, really believe, this is not just because I'm giving some talk, has infinite potential. You could stop for a second and think about, admit the idea of Vedanta. I and the divine are not different. So we're all capable of, infinite impact, but most of us fail to operate at anything, remotely close to it. And that's because we don't know how to think about ourselves and manage our lives. You think about another famous IITian who was extraordinarily accomplished, Rajat Gupta, McKinsey. Why did he implode so spectacularly? Because he didn't know how to manage one aspect of his life, one dimension of his life particularly well. And this is true of all of us. At some stage, we become our own worst enemy. There's a wonderful book by Marshall Goldsmith. It's called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. The things that have allowed you to be successful thus far are not enough to propel you to the whole way. And so I try to coach and mentor people to think much more proactively about managing themselves. What do I mean by that? Well, one of the most important things about managing yourself is manage your health. We take it for granted, and the reason you're here is because you're healthy. But that can change in a heartbeat. And I worked very, very closely for a while with Bill Gates, and I saw one of the reasons why he's able to do as much as he does is because he has extraordinary stamina, okay? Just physical stamina. And that came from being extremely disciplined, leading an extremely disciplined life in terms of exercise, in terms of eating and not drinking, and so on and so forth. So not taking health for granted is something that I would, must emphasize, and it gets more and more important as you cross that magical age of 40. Another critical thing is attitude. All recruiters, all good managers, they'll tell you one thing. They'll say hire for attitude and train for skills. Don't bother about whether the person knows X or doesn't know Y. What matters most fundamentally is attitude. And then, they'll learn the rest. And there are particularly some dimensions of attitude which are quite important, huge determinants of how far you go in your career. One of them is a simple thing called optimism versus pessimism. It turns out optimists do much better in life than pessimists. Now, this is hard news for me because I was born a pessimist. Fortunately, it's something you can gradually train yourself. Okay? There's a book called Learned Optimism. So this is, you don't have to die a pessimist just because you were born one. Another one, which I see very common as a manager of large organizations, is what I call a victim mindset. Okay? It's very easy to fall into a trap where you say, you know what, this situation is because of him or her, because I have a bad boss, my team is letting me down, or whatever, life. Don't ever fall into that, okay? The most important thing is to have this idea called personal accountability, where you say, no matter what the situation is, let me sort of take ownership for it, because then I can begin to change a few things. In fact, in all my recruiting, one of the most important things I look for in a person, whether I'm promoting a person or hiring a person, is how do they deal with failure? So the ability to deal with a crushing setback and not be crushed by it, get up, dust yourself off, keep going. It's a hugely important part of it, and we need to cultivate that. So I talked about managing yourself. I would say another important aspect of managing yourself is self-awareness. Do you know your strengths, and more importantly, do you know your weaknesses? And there's no shame in it. We're all born with certain strengths and certain weaknesses. I have some strengths. One of them is I connect well with people, I get them excited about things, and I get them to do things which they normally wouldn't want to do. So, knowing your strengths and weaknesses is important. Yet a couple of confessions. I turned out to be terrible at finance, and I turned out to be quite bored by execution. Now, these are terrible things to admit to. How do you run a large organization if you don't like numbers and you're bored by operations? So, I like new things, creativity, and so forth. So what I made sure is that on my team, there's always somebody who's fantastic at finance and there's somebody who loves execution, so that together we are whole. So all I'm saying is it takes a certain consciousness, and there's no shame in admitting what are you not good at, as long as you have conscious strategies to manage it. So managing self is actually the largest part of how you go all the way or almost all the way in your career. The last thing I want to say before I wrap up is the importance of something I call, luck or just grace. You can very quickly fall into an illusion that whatever is happening is because of you, that you are the master of your own destiny. And Western thought is all about that. Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." And Jack Welch says, "Control your destiny or someone else will." But the older I get, the more I realize this is quite a delusion. Certainly hard work matters. A whole bunch of other things matter. But I can point to any number of people who graduated with me, whether from IIT or business school or wherever, who were every bit as hardworking, much smarter, but life just dealt them a different set of cards. Okay? I think about what would my life be had I been born in whatever, Pakistan, Somalia, any number of places. Okay, game over. What would my life have been had I been born with, blind or with some mental disability, or into a family that did not value education the way mine did? So at any number of turns in life, I can point out that circumstances had a much larger role to play in whatever happened than my own efforts. Of course, efforts matter a great deal, but you need to understand that grace is something far greater. And that has also taught me a certain amount of humility. And I think ultimately what matters is the answer to the most important question, which is, how are you going to measure your life? How are you going to define success for yourself? Okay? And I think all of life is actually the search for the answer to that question. So let me pause here. I don't know how much time I have, and I don't know if there's any interest in a dialogue. I'm happy to take a few questions. But if there isn't any question, we'll call it an evening.
We'll have questions for another 15 minutes, about 5 to 6 questions.
Maybe you wanted to ask a question about what's a public sector bank like, I don't know. Yes, sir.
You just said you're not going to finance Bank of Baroda.
Yes.
How's that working out?
Well, we don't know yet. Still one year into the game. But no, I found that a business is neither about technology nor about finance. It's all fundamentally about people. The challenge in a public sector bank is about how do you align people, right? How do you get the government, which is the majority owner, aligned behind what you want to do and instead of interfering? How do you get people aligned behind what needs to be accomplished when they make, very low compensation relative to the private sector? You can't fire anybody. You can't promote anybody faster than others to any reasonable extent. So in this environment, how do you energize people? Okay. How do you shape the culture so that people are less vulnerable to temptation or corruption? Okay. So it's all about people and culture. I found the same thing to be true in Microsoft as well. Okay. It's all about getting people aligned behind a few clear goals and incredibly passionate about them, and the rest happens. Yeah, numbers are important, but very, very secondary in my opinion. That somebody else may disagree, so this is not the truth. It's just how I approach situations.
So if you were to rewrite concrete materials now after 1 year of public sector, what would change?
He's asking what would I change in the book I wrote. My book was all about two things. Why does India matter if you're a global company? And how the hell do you succeed in this? So the subtitle of the book is, if you can succeed in India, if you can win in India, you can win anywhere, right? This is the toughest place in the world to build and run a business. And the reason I wrote this book was it came out in 2013, which was the last years of the UPA government, where India was becoming more and more famous for either corruption or disastrously bad economic management or these kinds of things. And all global companies and CEOs were losing interest. And so I decided to make the case for why no global company can overlook India without consequences. And then made a very bold statement that hard as the market is, the bigger enemy to success is the mindset at headquarters, whether it's in Bentonville, Arkansas, or Seattle. And so I would say I would change very little about it. I think the events have played out in the last 3 years. It has become more and more clear that India is a vitally important market for every global company. And yeah, it remains a ferociously hard place to do business. And no, I wouldn't change a great deal. I would actually be more emphatic about some of the arguments. Yes, lots of that. Go to the back.
You wrote an article about banking if needed banks or not. Now you're one of the leading the bank. How does that work?
Yeah.
So what are the plans?
Banking is needed, banks are not. I wrote it after I joined the bank. No, it's very clear that legacy banks, whether it is Citibank or HDFC or Bank of Baroda or any of us, have to change profoundly and very fast or we're not going to exist. And the reason is nothing more than technology. Fintech startups are systematically going after every service that a bank historically has provided and doing it better, faster, and cheaper and getting valued for it. Whether it's payments or extending credit, advisory services, you're seeing hundreds of startups attempting to do that in a very lean, cost-effective, agile manner. And so the risk for banks like ours is, if we don't get super aggressive at this, these guys will each take a nibble or a bite out of our business. They'll take away our best customers and leave us stranded with high-cost infrastructure like branches and ATM networks, which nobody cares about, and the least profitable customers, right? So banking will continue in the sense that people will always need to make remittances, make payments, they'll need to borrow money, etc. So, but they won't need to all come to these kinds of institutions. They'll be far more effective and multiple mechanisms to address those needs. So that's why I wrote that, and I wrote it as a wake-up call for our public sector banks, because most of us have been consumed with one issue, which is bad loans. Meanwhile, the real threat is actually all this stuff. So we are focusing so much on the past, we need to have an eye on the future. That's really what it was all about.
So you said that when you applied for Harvard, the first time you were interaction was more difficult. So how do you decide that writing is something which you differentiate more, something you had always started in your mind?
So my question is, you said that you were denied admission the first time, and the reason being you were not different from the others. How were you different? So how did you decide that writing was something which would differentiate you from others?
That's a great question. I didn't think about what they wanted. I simply decided to express myself to the full extent. So I did a number of things. One of the feedback from the admissions office was, you have no managerial experience. I said, what the hell? How much managerial experience does any 24-year-old have? Okay? But they said, no, you need to have led a team. So one of the things I did is I went to my boss in Indiana and I told him I want to run a team. He said, get in line. There are 50 people waiting to run a team. But finally I was persistent, and he said, there's this factory we're closing down. It's a horrible place. Everybody has a bad attitude. Nobody wants that job. You can have it. So I said, I'll go. It was really tough. Okay, this is 1988. 1988. In the middle of Indiana, everybody is white. I'm not. Okay, I speak in a funny accent. The workers are really unhappy because they know their jobs are going to go away, the factory is going to be closed, really bad attitude. Every Sunday night I would cry thinking about going to work on Monday. Okay, but I decided I needed to do it, and this was the only way I would get that experience. Turned out to be a fantastic experience. And the most important thing is one of my references, you have to get those reference letters to the admissions office, was from the union leader. Now that's a differentiator, okay? I decided I wanted to write about my work. I did. So I simply did what I thought was necessary. And I think that's a really important thing, to not care about what do they want, but to think from yourself, how can I best express myself to the fullest? I didn't ask them what would tick their box.
Ravi, question.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone, for giving me this opportunity. Ravi, you have made a lot of changes in your career. So the question to you is, how did you prepare yourself for it? What were your selling points to people when you were doing a career switch? And how do you go about choosing what's the next best thing? Basically exploring techniques.
Sure. So first of all, I thought that's what I talked about, which is, work on yourself a lot, your attitude, your positivity, know your strengths, excel. If you do something really well, the headhunters are going to call you. You don't call them. Okay? I never went out looking for a job. Opportunities came, I said no to most, one or two were interesting. I went for it. And I think that's not a bad way. Instead of going and pounding on doors, you put out some cheese and see what comes and bites. So that's why I talk about why it's so important to build a reputation, whether you're in the technical path or a managerial path or an entrepreneurial path. You look at Rahul Yad, I don't know if he's in the room, but he's got a reputation too. That's not the kind of reputation you want to have. Okay? So I think a big part of it is doing these things, knowing how to learn, knowing how to reinvent yourself, having the right positive attitude, building that reputation, willingness to take some risk and fail if necessary before you succeed. I think those are the elements of how you do it. Very often in life you'll reach a point where you have no idea what you want to do. All you know is you don't want to do what you're doing. Okay? And I've been there too. And when that happens, what you need to do is try different things and then see what fits. So when I left Microsoft, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was clear what I didn't want to do, which was to take up another job. And so I tried 7, 8 different things, most of which didn't work, and then finally a few things went click, and that's what I pursued. So occasionally in your life you will be lost, and that's quite okay. Right? I talked about crossing the Sahara. There will be moments when it's not clear which direction to go. So what do? You walk around and test, and then decide which path to take.
Ravi, here, back, on your back.
Oh, there, right.
I'm reflecting on your beautiful statement about define your life, define your successes. But then I think of today in this interconnected world, you always work with team. Where there is somebody superior, peer, junior, everything. Now, if the success that you define for yourself has a contradiction with the success others define for you, how do you bring about harmony in that? How do you find your path for that success?
Yeah, that's a really good question. First of all, I think you should have conviction about your own ideas and what you think, your values and what you think is important and right. And you need to try and persuade others, right? And sometimes you won't succeed. I don't know if there's press here, I hope not. But I joined Microsoft when Bill Gates was still the chairman and very active. And Bill was a risk taker and he cared a lot about India. So my first few years were fantastic. And Bill retired and Steve Ballmer was running the show. And Steve was a very different guy. And particularly after 2008's financial crisis, he shut down everything that was experimental. And I had a lot of things in India where we were trying to do things that were locally sensitive. There were some wonderful things if we had pursued. It would be in a company might arguably be in a different place. But everything was shut down. And it became all about hit the numbers, hit the numbers. So I did my best for 2 years to try and keep things alive and persuade Steve that we needed much more flexibility to do things differently here. But ultimately I lost. And so, having tried and failed, I decided the right thing is to leave. So I groomed a successor who would do a fantastic job on running the current business. And I said, this game is no longer for me. Okay? Other times I succeeded. So I can give 7, 8 examples where I was able to do it. I'm giving you honestly an example where I tried hard for a long time. And ultimately I said, this is not winnable. And so there's no point going on banging your head against the wall. There's only blood to show for it. Forget it. And so we parted as friends. And on my book, one of the strongest testimonials at the back is Bill Gates. And why do I say that? I parted in a very happy way. Okay? And he's an investor in our fund right now. So, yeah, you do your best, but ultimately you have to walk your own path. The worst thing is, having failed, then you grimly say, I'm going to hold on to this job, and you're unhappy about it, and you make everybody around you unhappy. It's not a life worth living.
Ravi, I don't know if it will be an overstatement to say that what you probably spoke about in this last half an hour would have more impact on my life than all my schooling put together. And I'm a guy in education, so I just have this question for you. Where do you see education going, as it is going right now? And what moments do you see which will redefine education to make it contemporary to our times?
I don't know the answer. That's a huge question, and I'm not qualified to answer that. But I'll tell you, in the Bank of Baroda, we have a giant education challenge. We have 52,000 employees, okay? And the age distribution is bimodal. You have a huge group, about half, who are below the age of 30. And they're from generally the less developed states like Chhattisgarh and Orissa, because public sector banking is not the most attractive career option. And then you have another group who are about 48, 50 plus. And they're just waiting for retirement. Now, the challenge here is banking is becoming more and more an IT and information-driven business, okay? And it's a lot about extracting insight and acting on it and so forth. And so our entire population is low on both the attitude and the competencies that are needed for success. And I've come to conclude now that the heart of our success is going to come from, in some way, retraining 52,000 people. Now, training is a bad word also, because training feels like you train your dog. You don't train a human being, okay? You help a human being, you instill the desire to learn in a human being, okay? But the dog or another animal can be trained. So I don't like the word training at all. So the challenge here is there's fantastic content of every sort available in the world. A lot of it is online, a lot of it is free. So the challenge isn't one of world-class content. The challenge is, how do you instill the desire to learn in our people, okay? So I think the challenge in education today is very largely about creating this great desire to learn. Because once that seed is there, the person becomes unstoppable. They'll figure out where to go and get the content and the knowledge, etc. Okay? It's the old idea of teach a man to fish rather than give him a fish. And a big part of, I think, our approach has to be around lighting that fire. Because again, I talked in the beginning about the half-life of all knowledge. It's so short. I joined the IT industry in 2004. it might as well have been a different era. It was a different era. And so you have to completely reinvent yourself, learn new things on an ongoing basis. So this passion for learning is the most important thing that I think we need to put in our people.
Yeah.
There are lots more questions. I don't know if I have
yeah,
the time.
one
I have
question.
the time, so it's entirely up to the organizers.
Yeah, one question which probably each one of us will have our own take on that, but I would like to hear from you on that. How important is it to be on top of everything around you versus being good at what you are?
That's a good question. I think the desire to be on top of everything around you is a fatal one. Okay? Because you can never be on top of most things. And you see this tendency often in people, it's a desire to control things to perfection. And it results in you being so limited in your scope that you never achieve what you could and should. I think a large part of life is learning to let go. Sorry, this is going to be a good debate and we should probably... Sorry, I thought the control was that. Thank you for that clarification. Yeah, I think the ideal ideal profile right now is what's called a T profile, to have a certain amount of knowledge about a very vast array of subjects and to be deep in one or two areas. Okay? But I think today everything is connected, everything is becoming so interdisciplinary. Your ability to connect the dots across various fields is becoming more and more important. So I think we must have boundless curiosity and a certain amount of knowledge about a vast array of things. Did I answer your question? And so I spend a huge amount of time just browsing. And people think I'm mad, my wife is always upset at me, why are you always glued? It's not like I'm reading news. But, you know, you have to stay abreast, I think, with a very, very sort of wide array of subjects. So, yeah, and it's fun.
Just
Last couple of questions.
final
There's
question.
A lot of passion.
One second.
So, let's...
One quality you always
One quality is always hard to single out. I'll say two. One is not just passion, obsessiveness. Okay? People say we look for a very passionate person. Passion is an understatement. The really great entrepreneurs are absolutely obsessed with their idea and their business. And again, I'm very fortunate because I spent quite a bit of time both with Narayan Murthy when he was active at Infosys, as well as Bill Gates, two of the greatest entrepreneurs. And I saw this quality in spades, okay, that they're obsessive about everything. Narayan Murthy is obsessive about the smallest detail. Remember, there was this small meeting, and one of the mics wasn't working, microphones. And he got so upset about it, and the next morning he came at 6 a.m. to see if it had been fixed. Okay, this is when he was chairman 4 years ago. So they're extremely obsessive and deep perfectionists, and they're forces of nature. The other great quality is tenacity, that they don't give up, they keep at it, and keep at it, and keep at it. That doesn't mean you keep down a wrong path. Sometimes you have to pivot and be willing to, but never giving up is another huge quality of, I think, successful entrepreneurs.
Ravi, one small question. You mentioned a lot about changing your career over the period of your life, and at each point of time, you ultimately decided taking the decisions. If I have to ask, what is that one thing which you considered finally before taking those decisions versus not taking them? What was those? How did you ultimately end up taking the decision that okay? Because these are very dynamic changes, right? From one field to
And
another.
they're confusing as hell. So it's not like it's always so clear. And somebody taught me a trick, which is you toss a coin And then if you say, oh shit, it had been I wish it had been the other thing, then you know it's that one. But you really, what I've learned is you just ultimately sit quietly, you try and hear your innermost voice, and then you go with it. Okay, I know I'm going to be never invited again if I keep on like this. So thanks a lot. I've enjoyed this even more than you have. So